In this part of the lecture, I'm going to talk about instrumental variable estimation. Though the principles involved are very easy to explain, their implementation is not necessarily straightforward. My aim is not to tell you everything you need to know about IV estimates. That would require much more time than we have available. What I want to do is to give you a sketch of the basic ideas underlying the technique, such that you will have an idea about what's going on when you see IV estimates discussed in a research article. Of course, if you seriously intend to use the technique, you will need to read a specialized text or take a more specialized course. So far we've talked about randomization and conditioning on observables as ways in which we might try to make a causal inference by eliminating confounding with other variables. But are there other strategies that might achieve the same end? Let's think this through. What we ideally like to have is a source of exogenous variation that is predictive of which treatment state subjects will be allocated to, but which, conditional on the treatment state, is not predictive of the outcome. Go back to the idea of randomization. In the top left panel, I illustrate the classic randomized experiment. We can think of it as creating a variable r, which is a random number, then using that to allocate people to a treatment and control variable in a nice clean way that takes care of possible confounders. We're then free to examine the effect of the treatment on the outcome. Randomization is the source of exogenous variation. Now consider the top right panel. Here we have what is sometimes called a natural experiment. In this case, the government or some other authority uses a lottery based on birth date to select men for military service. Again, we've exogenously introduced variation in who does or does not get the treatment. We can use this random allocation to, for instance, study the causal effect on earnings in later life of serving in the military. Finally, let's turn to the bottom left panel. In some jurisdictions, compulsory schooling laws work in the following way. Pupils start first grade in the autumn of the calendar year in which they turn 6 and stay in school until their 16th birthday. So children born early in the year are almost 7 when they enter first grade, and you'll turn 16 in the middle of 10th grade, at which point they may leave. Children born later in the year start school just before or just after their 6th birthday and finish 10th grade before they turn 16. They can't legally quit before finishing 10th grade. Why is this important? Well, for at least some of the students, the length of their schooling is not a matter of choice, but a matter of when in the year they're born, and when in the year they are born can, to all intents and purposes, be regarded as random. This creates a source of exogenous variation in length of education, i.e. something that's not under the control or choice of the pupils themselves, and unrelated to other possible confounders. The idea is that the instrument, in this case quarter of the year that you're born in, plays the same role as the randomization device in the first two examples, and allows a nice clean inference about the causal effect of schooling on wages. Now, whether month of birth is actually a good instrument or not for this purpose is something that's a matter of some debate in the returns to schooling literature. But for our merely illustrative purpose, we don't have to go into the details of that dispute. So, here in a nutshell is the problem that instrumental variable estimation is meant to solve. We want to study the effect of t on y. But there's measurement error in y. Perhaps there's non-compliance or contamination between treatment and control. There also might be self-selection into t based on unobservables, and there might be missing observables that should have been conditioned on but haven't been. Any or all of these things will be captured by the error term, epsilon, and unfortunately for us, they will cause epsilon and t to be correlated, indicated here by the dashed curved line. If we had complete and error-free measurement, we would be okay, but we don't. We know that if epsilon is correlated with t, then the beta we estimate in an OLS regression will give us a biased estimate of the causal effect. Think back to your lectures on OLS regression. One of the things you're assuming is that the x's are uncorrelated with epsilon. Some people find the following diagram helpful for getting an intuitive feel for what instrumental variable estimation does. The red circle represents the variation in y, the outcome variable. The blue circle represents variation in t, the treatment variable. It's simplest, though of course not necessary, to think of this as a continuous variable. The dashed circle represents variation in the instrument. The variation in y is generated by t and by an error term, epsilon. Region A is the part of the variation in t that is shared with epsilon. We definitely do not want to use that to estimate the effect of t on y. Region B is the part of the variation in t that is shared with y, but not shared with epsilon, or the instrument. Region C is the variation in t which is shared with the instrument, but not shared with y. Finally, we come to what we're interested in, region D. This is the variation in t shared with the instrument and with y. This is variation in t which we're prepared to assume is generated exogenously by the instrument, I, which is analogous to a randomization device. So, how does this all work out in practice? First of all, we need an instrument. This instrument should be correlated with t. The higher the correlation, the better, and it should not be correlated with epsilon. Another way of putting the latter condition is to say that it should only affect y through t. If you can find something that plausibly meets these conditions, then you're in business. All you have to do then is regress the treatment variable on the instrument and save the predicted values. That isolates the portion of the variation in t that is shared with the instrument. Then, regress the outcome y on the predicted value of t. That isolates region D of the intersecting circles you saw a moment ago. The beta you estimate in the second equation gives you your estimate of the effect of t on y. Formally, it's nothing more than the ratio of the OLS estimate from the regression of y on I to the OLS estimate of t on I. If you've followed me so far, you will have realized that there are a few ifs and buts about the IV strategy. Perhaps the most consequential is that it doesn't actually estimate the average treatment effect. Instead, what we get is a so-called local average treatment effect, or LATE. This is also sometimes called CATE, which stands for Complier Average Treatment Effect. It is a treatment effect for the group that would be induced to take the treatment by the instrument, but otherwise would not have done so. The implicit exclusions are individuals who would always have taken the treatment, the always takers, and those who under no circumstances would have taken the treatment, the never takers. You'll find a Stata do file that walks you through IV estimation on my home page. If you want to see some examples of IV estimation in action, then these two articles may be of interest to you.